Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another We Are Wetrooms online training session. Today, we've got a couple of hours of talking about wet rooms, and I'm going to run through some of the core products that we can use to create a practical but luxury and beautiful space in your bathroom. And we're going to go through a few of the myth-busting subjects that come up during our, technical conversations we have with people on the phone. So my name's Sean. I've been working at Impey for quite a long time now in the technical department. So, I've watched the whole trend of wet rooms start and to get to what we're seeing now. So it's been a very good journey with us. The company's been going for about 20 years, just over 20 years now. Originally, we started as a healthcare company, and basically the luxury wet room market was born from the invention of a 22 mil former that created a real difference into the healthcare market for people to be able to get in and out of a shower without much effort at all. So the luxury wet room market is still a very big thing. It's still a very new thing to a lot of people. And I guess you guys that are on here, the installers, you've all been asked to fit a wet room before. You've never really looked into doing it, and you end up fitting shower trays. And we always say to people when they ask us who our competitors are, and we normally say to people, it's a shower tray. Because a lot of people have never looked into how to fit a wet room, and there's a lot of nerve. There's a lot of fear about fitting wet rooms because basically you're tiling a trap into the floor, and what if it goes wrong? It can cause a lot of damage, and that's generally the fear of it. So what I'm going to show you today is I'm going to show you the products that we have, products that we've developed, and I'm going to try and get rid of a bit of that fear by showing you how the products are fitted. And the features and benefits to make your lives a little bit easier. Now, in history, we see when people try and cut corners when they're fitting wet rooms, that's when it kind of goes wrong. So what we've tried to do with the products is manufacture products that save you time and money, and save you having to cut those corners and lessening the risk of things going wrong with it. So why would you fit a wet room? There's a lot of practicalities for wet room. Level access showering is quite an important thing. Future-proofing a house is important these days. But creating a big or even a small open space that you can get in and you can get out and you can shower. It lets a lot of light in. It gives you a little bit of extra space within the showering area, and it enables you to start your day with something other than trying to get into a very small cabin to shower in, and it just makes a difference to your day. So have any of you guys fitted wet rooms before? Has anybody got any experience in wet rooms? I think there's a feature there where you can put your hands up or you can put a thumbs up or something. If you want to do that, it gives me a bit of an idea of if we've got anybody that's got any kind of experience here. Have you all gone quiet on me? That's okay, I can talk well. Oh, thanks, Paul. Someone's listening. That's good. That's good. Right. Okay. So what we're going to do then, I'm going to get straight into it. The first product I'm going to show you is a flagship product that we have. It's called Easy Fit. There's a reason it's called Easy Fit. It's the clues in the name, really. A little bit about the product. The product was really born out of, well, this current product is third generation wet room formers made by Impey. We've taken feedback from you guys, the installers. We've basically given you everything that you've asked for. So, with the old system that we had, it was very heavy. It was a solid core product. It was hard to cut. You were limited to what you could cut off, and it had a fixed drain position. So, we were asked, could we make it lighter? Because some of the old wet room formers that we used to do were about 40 kilos and not much fun to carry up the stairs in the morning. We were asked to make it with multiple drainage positions, which really, when you're manufacturing products, it means that's really not something that you can do. It's not financially viable to make the same size product with different hole positions in it. We've taken some of the weight out. We've put a lot of the strength in. We've made it out of a different material, which makes it better for our logistics. But you know, more importantly, it just makes it easier for you guys to fit. So I'm going to show you the Easy Fit product now, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about that afterwards.
The Impey Easy Fit deck provides the 1 in 40 gradient that is required in the wet room area for efficient drainage. This video guide shows a typical installation on a wooden floor. Any installation, of course, should be carried out with full reference to the supplied instructions. Designed, engineered and made in Britain, the Easy Fit deck is the strongest and most popular wet room floor former installed and specified throughout the UK and Europe by professional wet room installers, national house builders, architects and care home providers. It can be easily installed on either wooden or concrete floors on ground level or above. At 22mm thick, the same as most commonly found floorboards, the Easy Fit acts as a direct floorboard replacement with 4 preformed gradients to accurately channel water to the drain. The hatched underside has been expertly engineered to evenly distribute loads across the entire surface area, whilst also making it significantly lighter and easier to carry than any other. The Easy Fit can comfortably bear loads well in excess of 300 kilograms without the need for underboarding, saving both time and money. To start the preparation, begin installing the deck by checking that the wet room floor is level. If not, then this must be resolved first. Please contact our technical department for further advice if required. Mark out the outline of the deck and cut the floorboards using a suitable saw. Then remove the boards. You'll likely find all sorts of underfloor obstructions ranging from double joists, gas pipes, water pipes and potentially many more unexpected obstacles that you're not qualified or inclined to move. The Easy Fit, with its large rotating drain plate, has been specifically designed to eliminate these all too common installation headaches. Early wet room floor formers were considerably heavier to carry on site and featured just an offset drain which provided only 2 possible areas to locate drainage. The rotating drain plate provides a wide range of locations to position the drain and avoid all obstructions. This unique element of the Impey Easy Fit range can easily save up to half a day's installation time or more. And better still, if you need to trim the deck to suit boxed-in pipework areas or irregular wet room corners, then this can be easily achieved by simply cutting the hatched area with a standard handsaw. It's important to note that only the hatched areas are trimmable and the smooth underside should not be trimmed. For further advice on trimming, please contact our technical team. Once you've found the best location for your drainage setting, you'll need to secure down the exposed ends of the cut floorboards and then fit noggins to the perimeter of the space, whilst taking care to check that the deck remains level. When complete, you're ready to begin linking up and testing the drain. Unlike one-part drains, all Easy Fit decks are supplied with a 2-part drain, which allows for full water seal testing before the top drain section and floor former have been finally secured. Apply solvent well to the drain outlet and waste pipe. Once this is cured, pour a quantity of water down into the sump so that the water exits into the waste pipe. In this instance, we're using a horizontal drain. However, vertical versions are available. Once a watertight connection is confirmed, you can begin to secure the deck into the floor by inserting the wood screws provided into the pre-drilled pilot holes. Continue the same process with the large rotating drain plate, taking care that all screw heads are correctly countersunk, and again checking that the deck remains level throughout the process. The final stage is to connect the sump seal and the bowl. Ensure the seal is positioned on the rim of the sump and fully pushed into place. Drill pilot holes into the rotating base plate using a 3mm drill bit and secure the bowl using the remaining screws. Align the bowl and sump, then fit the 25mm screw through the central bowl crossbar. Tighten the screw by hand until the crossbar meets with the boss in the centre of the sump. It is essential that this is tightened by hand only and not with a power tool. Once complete, use a supplied cover to stop any unwanted debris from falling into the drain. For any further advice on installing the deck or for details of our National Impey Wet Room Training course, please call our technical helpline or visit impeyshowers.com.
So this is the Aquadeck Easy Fit. This is the flagship product that we have for creating a wet room in every situation. So this was originally designed as a wet room for wooden floor installation, but it can also be put down into a concrete installation. Let's have a closer look. So here's the product itself. It's a 22mm former with a 1 in 40 gradient built into the surface area. If I pull it back, you might be able to see that the lines go from all 4 corners down to a point of the eccentric circle. If I spin it around, you can see the underside of it is hatched. Now, that's hatched for a few reasons. But when we put it down onto a concrete floor, you'll evenly spread the bedding that you're going to put it down onto. Now, as you saw in the video, you can cut this with a handsaw. Now, everyone is slightly different. Everyone has got slightly different trim on it. This one, you can cut all of that trim off of there and all of that hatched off of there. So in essence, you can cut all the way down to the smooth part under the former. If you're not sure about it, phone up our technical department. They'll give you a spec sheet which will tell you every bit of trim and every bit of central drain position that you can provide with the eccentric drain plate. The eccentric drain plate. This is quite a clever feature. Now this one will plug the hole, and as you saw in the video, you can spin it around to avoid anything that you've got going on under the floor. So why would you spin it around? Maybe you've got double joists, maybe you've got gas pipes, maybe you've got all kinds of things that you can't legally take out of under the floor. Or maybe you just want to change the way that the former looks and performs. For a good example, so if we wanted to cut it, if we wanted a long and thin wet room with a drain at one end, we would cut all the hatched area off that we can. We'd position the drain hole at one end, so we'd have more deck on one side and the drain a little bit more closer to the edge. Okay, so the Easy Fit Former, it looks like a shower tray, it performs like a shower tray, but the installation on it is slightly different. It's very, very important that you get this in level because there's no upstands to it. So we're creating level access showering with no upstands on it at all. So being level is fundamental in the installation. So ensure that it's level on all 4 sides. Once you've got it down, and you've screwed it down around the outside edges where you can see the pilot holes on there, your best bet is to just get on it and jump up and down and make sure you take the flex out of it a little bit, okay? If it's still bouncing when you've got it fixed down, there's no reason why you can't countersink it anywhere across where you've got a fixing, countersink it, put fixings in just to make sure it's shored up. Now, the good thing about doing this now, or the important thing about doing this now, is that you will only get a chance to do this at this stage. So once you've got a membrane on top of that, you can't screw it down anymore. So it's very, very important that you check it, make sure there's no flex in it, take all the flex out before the membrane goes down into its final position. Okay, so we've safely secured the former down. In this situation, we've got perfectly suited joists. If you find yourself in a situation where you might have 600 spaced manufactured I-beams or anything that isn't as level as it could be, you might want to think about underboarding it or putting extra noggins in. Do contact the technical department for advice on that, or do look at the instructions for advice on that. So we're here now, we've got this secured down, we've taken the bounce out of it as you saw. Now you can see we've got the eccentric drain plate out, and you can see we've got a few obstructions under here. So we're going to spin the waste around to about here. Now, if you don't have to spin the waste around to avoid unforeseen things, do think about your tiler at this point. Spin it around to a place where he can get some symmetry with his tiles. If you need to, if you're not the tiler, speak to the tiler, find out what size tiles he's going to be using, and do think about where you're going to put that drainage position to make it look the best you can make it. So at this stage, we're going to centralize it on this edge. It means we're going to get a little bit of symmetry with the cut lines on here. So this is going to be our final position. Now, if I pull this out again, you'll see there's little ridges under here that match up with the ridges that are on the former itself. So this might seem a little bit spongy in this position right now, but once you've got this screwed in, and those bits click together, once you've got the screws in there, that creates the extra bit of strength that you expect from the former itself. So we're going to put the waste in this position. First of all, we're going to get the bottom of the trap. Now, the trap that comes with this, and most of the traps that come with this, are a 2-part trap. Now, what that means is that the top part of the trap, which we see, which is the top bit that goes into the eccentric drain plate, is separate from the bottom, which is known as the sump. Now, the sump comes with a rubber seal. I'm going to put that one on first. That's quite sticky, so it'll stay on there. It's not coming off. Okay, so I've put the sump in position. It's a solvent weld sump. So it's got a 40mm solvent weld outlet on it, so stick it with solvent weld. The reason we go for solvent weld is because it's more secure under the floor, okay? If you use compression fit on there, there's a good chance that potentially in 10 or 15 years' time, you might get a little bit of a problem with the rubber seal on there. So solvent weld means that it's going to be secure for the life of the wet room former. So I've got that in position, I've secured it in place. The pipe work is connected up the other end, so it's kind of bouncing up and down. Now, what I will say about this trap is that it needs to go in even. So if it needs propping it up to make sure that you've got it flat before you do up the screw, that's one thing you need to do. The other thing I would suggest is that if you're not going through some kind of hanger, or you're not going through some kind of I'm not going to say joist, but noggin maybe. Put some pipe hangers on there, support the pipe work to take the stress off of the sump, because it is only one screw that screws that on there. So do what you can to support the rest of the trap. So at this stage, I've not screwed in here. I wanted to get everything in dry. If I pop that in position, it's really now just a case of getting the single screw, popping that in there, and doing that up hand tight with a screwdriver. So every one of our traps has got a 50mm water seal, which is the legal requirement for a trap into a stack pipe. Now, the 50mm water seal is created by these two components, okay? So you've got a dip tube and a bucket. So the water comes down here, fills this up with 50mm of water, and then the constant flow of water then comes through and expels the water out through the edges. So you've always got a 50mm water seal trap in there to stop the gassy smells from coming out. So if one of those components isn't in there, you're going to get gassy smells coming out. So it's very important that both of those two bits are maintained. When you clean these out, don't put boiling water down here, or don't use neat bleach down there, because you could deform these, okay? So diluted bleach to clean the drains out every time. Okay, so put your finger in one of the little half-moon cutouts on the height adjustment, and if you move it anti-clockwise, you'll see that the frame moves up. That's your height adjustment. You've got 6 to 26mm height adjustment in there. We can supply a 10mm spacer if you wanted anything higher than that. So I've adjusted the height of the frame. And what you want to do then, normally when you're doing this is going to be membraned by here. So once you've got the height that's desired, you mark on the rings that you've got with a pencil or a marker pen, and then you mark on the bottom. Now that would generally be on the membrane, because you've got the membrane on there. So each one of these bits will come out independently, including the height adjustment rings. So what you want to do is get some solvent weld. You want to coat both sides of that. You want to put that back in. You want to keep it moving until you line the lines up, and then just let that go off, and then do the same with this one. Pop that back in and get it square to make sure that you've got the symmetry of your tiles. Okay, so we've put the Easy Fit in. We've put it in, we've made sure it's level. If it's not level, you've got to level that up. You've got to make sure that it's perfectly level. As I said earlier, it does exactly what a shower tray does, but there's no upstands on it. We're looking at level access showering on here. So, you know, anything out by even a couple of millimeters could change the performance of the former. So make sure it's level, make sure that it's screwed down to every joist that you can screw it down onto. Make sure that your joists are level. Make sure if you need extra support underneath it to take the bounce out of it, you've done that. And make sure the drain is positioned ready for the tiler to come in, and he can do his tiling with the symmetry that's required.
Okay, it can't be that easy. I hear you ask yourselves. Yeah, so we've seen that go down into wooden floor, and as I said in the video, that it is perfect situation. So you might find yourself with a situation where your joists aren't level, or you've got to level the former up by underboarding it. Now that's all quite simple to do. It's we would insist on at least an 18mm ply in there if you're going to underboard it, something that's as structural as the former. Now the former is structural. It can span over joists. Now the maximum we would say is about 415 centers. You can avoid underboarding by putting extra noggins in and closing those gaps up to sort of a foot square, if that's an easier way of doing it, or you've got excess noggins on site. Now, we saw putting it into a wooden floor. Now, putting it into concrete floor is almost equally as simple as that. You would put that down onto your concrete floor. Obviously, do a bit of a depth test first to find out how deep your concrete is. Now, you can do that with a drill if you need to. Drill into the concrete, find out what the resistance is like, or pull the drill bit out and check to see what different colors you've got. Now, depending on how old the house is, would depend on how thick the screed is. Now, anything after the 1950s is going to be at least 50 mil of screed in there, as long as it was done properly. Modern day floor pour is about 75 mil. It can be a little bit more than that. So do have a look and see what depth you've got in there to make sure that you can get what you want in there. Now, if you haven't got the depth to fit the standard gravity trap in there, we have got other options for that. But the same, when you're fitting it into concrete, put it onto the floor, draw around it, take the deck away. And what I've done in the past is I've used an electrician's wall chaser that's got 2 diamond tip blades on it. And I've basically run down the length of it with this one. And then I run down the width of it, cutting it into blocks that are about 1.5 inches with a depth set of about 30 mil. So if you do it that way, I know it can be a little bit dusty, but it's a lot better than going in there with a Kango and creating a plowed field where you've got to make it good before you can start putting the former down. So if you set it at depth of 30 mil, it gives you enough room for some bedding. Now, bedding it down, you want to use a weak sand and cement mix, maybe a 4-to-1 mix. Or if you're really up against time and you've got to put your membrane down the next day, use a flexible tile adhesive on there. And the reason we do that is because anything that you mix that's not going to go off that quick is still going to be going off. So it needs to be 100% cured before you then go ahead and put the membrane down. So anything that's not cured could release a bit of moisture and it could delaminate the sticky side of the water guard system that you're putting down. So ensure that it's cured. If you're up against it, like I say, use a flexible tile adhesive. It'll go off overnight and you'll be able to tank it the next day. So there are quite a few different traps that can be used with this. The standard one, as we saw in the video, is a gravity trap with a horizontal waist on it with a solvent weld connection on there. Now, the trap itself is set slightly at a bit of an angle, so you're going to get a 1 in 40 gradient straight off the bat. But as I said in the video, do use pipe hangers. Do use something to hold the weight of that, because you have got that one screw on there, and what you don't want is it moving around or breaking that little seal that you've got on there. And you don't want to over tighten it when you put it in, and don't use a whizzy. Use a screwdriver, because it is a plastic bar on there. So if you can't get this in because it's got too much depth on it, we've got a couple of different options. There's what we call a slimline waist here. If you're putting it into concrete, this one's ideal for it. The good thing about this is the thickness of it. Now, if you can see the depth difference in here, it's quite a lot. This one has got about 49 mil depth. Compared to the 98 mil of the standard one. Plus, if you look closely at this one, you'll see that the outlet is a lot closer to the bottom of the former when you put that in, which will give you potentially another 1.5 meter pipe run at 1 in 40. So when you do your 1 in 40 gradient on your pipe work, you need a 25 mil per every meter run of pipe work to create that 1 in 40. So having it a little bit higher up will give you a little bit more pipe run. On this one, you'll see there's a compression fit nut on there. I would, as I said in my part of the video, I would encourage you to take that off and solvent weld straight into that, because it's ABS, the same as the standard one. There is another feature with this. It is a waterless trap, what we call a waterless trap. So what I have here is a little silicone non-return valve with a little hair trap that can be taken out and cleaned. Okay, so it's a waterless trap. So you've got to think about how you've got to think about your waste exit strategy with this, where you're going to be taking this water. This one can be used directly into an outside hopper, into an open drain outside. But because there's not a physical 50 mil water seal on there, you can't use this directly into a stack pipe as a standalone product. Now, what you can do if you need to use this and you haven't got the depth to get the standard trap in, is there's a product on the market made by HEP, and that's an inline non-return valve. That can be connected onto that, and that can be used directly into a stack pipe. So if you are going to use that, because you need to create a little bit less depth on it, just make sure you take this piece out. What I would do is I would take the hair catcher off, which is just a little plastic frame with a load of grids in it. I'm not sure if you can see that. Pop that one back into situ because that will stop all the hair from going down there. Connect the HEP onto it a little bit further down, put a bit of pipe run on it and put it in there. And then you've got the same kind of non-return valve in there. So that'll give you a little bit of extra or a little bit less depth if you are limited. Now, if you really can't get a gravity drain in there, your other option would be to use a pumped waste. Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with shower waste pumps, but this whole installation within the former keeps it down to 38 mil. So, and that includes the 22 to 22 mil John Guest fitting on the end of it. So I would, on the end of here is a negative priming diaphragm pump that will suck the water straight out of this pancake trap. So if I show you this, you see there's a tiny little hole in there. It doesn't go through. It will go onto the end of this 22 mil spigot. Now, I've got a 22 to 22 mil spigot on the end of there because I would put a high flow rate pump on there. So an example is the Drydeck 20 pump, which will take 20 litres a minute down the drain. It's a digital pump, so it can be manually manipulated so that it will run at the same flow rate as the shower, lessening the amount of slurping noise you get around the drain, which is quite important if you're putting a luxury wet room in. So you get all the features on these straps. You get all the height adjustments, 6 to 26 mil. If you are using a slightly lower flow shower and you didn't want to use the 20 litre per minute pump, there are a bunch of other pumps on the market from us that you can get. One of them is called a Instant Match Premium that'll do about 12 litres a minute, which is pretty standard for a standard mixer shower nowadays. Now, what you'd find with that one is it's slightly different. It's got 22 to 15 reducer, and you run into the pump at 15 and out at 22, rather than putting a damp surger on there. But it's a perfect solution if you can't get gravity drainage in there. Now, we'll have a bit of time to talk about pumps a little bit later if you wanted to talk about that. Has anybody got any questions on anything that we've seen? Don't be shy. Oh, we've got any hands up?
Hi, Sean. We've had one on the inbox. So it says, what would you recommend to use to bring the deck level should the floor joist be unplumbed? Sorry. And would 8x2 next to the original joist be sufficient?
Yeah. Bolting joist to joist is probably going to be the easiest thing to do. But in that situation, I would probably go the whole hog and underboard it. So with an 18 mil ply, so that the former is completely level. It then will give you the option to use a latex to get the rest of the floor to what you need to. You could just bolt joist to joist to get that level. If your spacing is pretty standard, that basically will simulate what you're trying to achieve anyway. As I said earlier, the deck's structural enough for it to be able to just sit on top of a joist. As long as the joist spacing isn't too far apart. So that's probably your quickest and easiest option. Yeah, bolting a piece of something onto it. Just make sure it is bolted as well and not just screwed in, so that you've got a decent purchase onto that existing joist. Now, if you underboard it, you could potentially bed that down onto tile adhesive as well, just to make sure that it stays where it needs to be. I wouldn't just bed it on. Make sure that it's got pilot screws in it as well. And the same as if you're putting it onto a concrete floor. What I found when you're putting it onto a concrete floor is that you're going to have to chase your floor out to accommodate the depth of the former, which is 22 mil. So if you cut it down to 30 mil, that gives you a bed of adhesive as well. But also you've got to cut a trap in there and a length of, or you've got to chase it out to get a pipe in as well. So there's going to be an element of backfill at some point as well. So when you do this into concrete floor, what my trick or tip would be is to put it into a position before you put anything, any kind of underboarding near it, because you've got to put it together dry to make sure your trap fits in the hole that you've bored out. You've got to make sure that you've got enough pipe run in your chase. You've got to make sure if you've drilled through the house to get it out, that your pipe is at the right fall on there, and you're not putting too much whip on it as well. So put it all together dry to test it to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do. But what you want to do is just put pilot holes into the four corners, drop a couple of plugs into your existing concrete floor, so that every time you take that deck out, and you will do that a few times while you're putting everything back in and taking it out and just measuring up and backfilling. So there will be an element of taking it all out and putting it back in. But what that will mean is that you're always putting it back in exactly the same place, which is important when you come to put that final screw into the waste, because that's one screw that goes into one screw hole, and that's got to be lined up properly. So as long as you've got that screwed in and it goes in exactly the same place every time, you're not going to get any stress on that trap, and the screw's going to go in without putting stress on the plastic fittings as well. So that's quite an important thing. Anybody got any questions on fitting it into concrete floor? Okay, well, you guys are good. Right, okay, if we've got no more questions at this stage, the next thing I need to show you is something that's slightly different. We're still talking about gradient here. The most important part of fitting any wet room with anybody's products is gradient, drainage, and waterproofing. So I'm going to show you another way to get gradient. Now, this is a slightly different thing that does exactly the same, but is very, very popular, as the aesthetics of this is really the hot trend in wet rooms at the moment. So the next thing I'm going to show you is what we call aqueduct linear.
So this is the aqueduct linear range. You'll see a slight difference with this one, although it does exactly the same thing. You'll see there's a linear drain in there. The linear drain is aimed for a new aesthetic, but also for a slightly higher flow rate. Okay, so here's the aqueduct linear former. And this is actually this is the two-way former. And what that means is that you've got two ways of fall on here. So you've got front to back, and then back to front on the other side. In essence, you've got two ways of fall that drop down to where the linear drain sits. Now, for sure, an angle, there's a slight upstand on here. This is here to keep the former 22mm thick all the way around, so it's a natural replacement for the floorboard, the same as the Easy Fit. But it's also to stop the water from falling off the edge. So if you didn't have that on there, you'd have to build that up yourself manually. If I spin it around, you see that the two-way former is made in the same way as the Easy Fit. You've got all the hatching that is required. For the strength, it's a lot lighter than the old ones. But this one, the installation is a little bit more specific. Because it's very thin where the drain is, I don't know if you can see that little bit flexing there, this product needs complete underboarding with an 18mm ply set at the height of the joists. Okay, so we've got the linear in position. You can see there's quite a big hole there, the aperture for the drain, and you can see there's two options here for this part of the waste. So again, we've got a two-part trap, the same as we saw on the Easy Fit, to make it a little bit easier fit. Now we've got two options on here, just in case we've got a joist that runs all the way through. So if I wanted to, I could put it there. If I spin it round, I can pop it into that position just to give yourselves a little bit of extra scope. Now this one, if you don't do it uptight, straight away, you can spin it round, so the exit, the same as on the Easy Fit, can go in any direction that you want. Now, the thing that most people notice about these is a slight upstand. I'll show you how to deal with that in a minute. The important thing about this is that it does need underboarding, and the reason being is because when you create a former at 1 in 40, there's got to be a thin bit at one point. And where my foot is there, you can see there's a slight bit of bounce in there. So the same as what we saw with the Easy Fit, you've got to do everything you can to avoid that. So the best you can do with this is to drop a batten in 18mm lower than the top of the joist, infill it with an 18mm plywood, and that gives you full scope to screw it down any way you like. You'll notice on this one, it hasn't got any pilot holes, but we'd recommend that you fit 150 to 200 center screw holes in here all the way around it, and also go up through the middle. Okay, so if you put a piece of 18mm ply in there, or bits of 18mm ply in there, it gives you a fit in for those screws. Again, with the other one, same as the other one, you need to countersink those screws, because when you put the membrane over the top, you don't want little screw heads sticking out that might puncture the membrane. Okay, so one of the most common questions I get asked about this product is, how do we fit the tile trim? How do we deal with the upstands on either side of it? Now, it really depends on what situation you're putting it into. So if this is going in between two walls, where we're going to, the same as we're going to put it into this rig, you might have to rethink what you're going to do with these. If you're going to put it up against one wall and you're going to have a screen on one side, you're definitely going to be using these trims. So these trims are designed for 8 to 10 mil tiles, and they sit right on the edge, just a little bit of overhang of the upstand. I'm going to push a couple of tiles up against there, okay? And then these tiles then sit on top of that and make it a little bit more tidy. Okay, so we've got the linear in position. We've tested it for flex to make sure that it's not going to flex and pop your tiles up. We've put it in, we've tested it for levels, so we know it's going to perform exactly as it should do, and we're ready now to adjust the height. We've connected the bottom of the trap up the same as we did in the other one. It's a 2-part trap with just one screw to pull it up. Again, make sure that the trap is flat when it's fixed to the bottom of the trough, and make sure, if you're running your pipe work a long way and you've got no support on those, to put some pipe hangers on there to take the stress off of the trap a little bit. So next step is to think about your tiling. So on this one, the same as the Easy Fit, you've got 6 to 26 mil height adjustment, but this one's done slightly differently. So if you look very closely at these, you've got a couple of little triangles up here, and I've got a few little plastic pieces that go in there, and those clip in until you're ready for your final fix. And this is your height adjustment. Okay, now how these work. Now how these work is they clip into the bottom of the tiling frame. So if I pop the tiling frame in there, those are all adjusted up to the right height. The height that you're going to be working to is from the flat edge upwards, okay? So that's going to be the thickness of your tiles. If it's any more than that, you can adjust it up. Now, the way that you do that is to move the little blocks up to the next step. And if you want to go right way to the top, you can move it right way up to the top step, okay? So we're going to fit it relatively low on this one. And I'm going to pop that frame in. Okay. The clamp is for the membrane. Okay, when you fit the membrane on this one, you want to run the membrane over the top without that clamp. Pop that clamp into a position where you know it's going to be. Draw around the inside of it with something that's got a finer tip than a marker pen, maybe a biro, and with a pair of scissors you cut around that piece. So your height adjustment is exactly the same as the other one, 6 to 26 mil. Now you've got 6 to 16 mil with the blocks that I've shown you with that. And if you want the 10 mil extension, you just put the other ones in. When you're happy with the right height, you solvent weld those blocks together, and then your tiler can then tile up to that tile frame. So here's a slightly different option. Now this is what we know as a standalone linear drain. So these little additional feet on here, they don't come with the former. Now you can actually buy these linear drains as standard, as a standalone with the feet on it, so that you can raise it up, so that you can build the rest of your floor up. So I just wanted to show you that bit as an additional part to that particular linear drain. Okay, so we fitted the linear. As I said before, it's a slightly different fit. There's a little bit more work involved in this one, but it is worth it. Now, the extra work is the underboarding. Now, the underboarding is there to stop the decks from flexing a little bit, to make sure that you don't get crack grout, which will, in turn, allow water to get under the tiles and sit on the membrane. That's fine if you've got underfloor heating in there, but you want to try and avoid that, really. So underboarding it, getting as much stability in this former as you can is paramount with the installation of this former. So we fitted the underboarding, we fitted the deck, we screwed it down, we fitted the drain, we've adjusted the height. It's got 6 to 26 mil height adjustment on there. Again, if you're not doing the tiling yourself, speak to the tiler about how thick the tiles are going to be, what bed of tile adhesive he's going to use. Or if not, leave it for the tiler. It's going to be a little bit easier.
So that's the linear. Now that's this is the future of wet rooms. This is what everybody likes to see at the moment. The linear drain is been very popular with us and other manufacturers across Europe for a good 4 or 5 years now. The reason we brought this out originally is because there was a lot of people that wanted to throw 45 to 60 liters of water down the drain per minute, and there wasn't anything on the market to deal with that kind of stuff. We were seeing people putting storm drains in their bathrooms just to get that extra indulgence with that amount of water. We have noticed now, or we know now, that a lot of the manufacturers of showers have cut flow rates down quite a lot because everybody's become a little bit more environmentally savvy, including us. And generally, you're going to see a standard flow rate of about 12 liters a minute from most mixer showers. There are always going to be exceptions. You know, you're going to get, if you get a mega flow system in there with enough pressure to create a lot more water, there is going to be the option for indulgence. So, you know, we can still take 45 liters away with this drain quite easily. So what I didn't mention with the Easy Fit, the Easy Fit will do 32 to 35. This one will do an extra 10 liters on top if you wanted that indulgence. And the reason it'll take a little bit more is really the trough has got a little bit more surface area to allow for a little bit more water to go through. It's still going through the same trap. The trap will take more if it's under pressure. You know, anything's got a little bit more head of water on there will give you a little bit of extra flow rate through there. But there are a few options with this, with the drain for this one, which I'll show you in a second. When you put this down, again, we saw it going into a wooden floor. Again, we talked about perfect situations, but the underboarding is paramount with this one, and it's very important that that thin part around the drain gets supported nicely so that there's not a kind of a diving board effect that might crack the grout and allow water to get under the tiles to sit on the membrane. So underboarding it is very important, and also you know, screwing it down as much as you can. Again, it's the same as the Easy Fit in that respect. Now fitting into concrete is exactly the same. Bed it down onto a weak sand cement mix if you've got the time to do that. What you will find with this one is that the installation is a bit more intricate. It's a premium product. You will find that there's a little bit more detail involved in the installation side to get this right. But it's definitely worth it in the long run. So the drain that we saw on there, it was the stainless steel top, which is standard. We have moved along a little bit now. We've got different tops on it. We've got different finishes on it, but we've also got a tile insert. Now, the thing I get asked about most, or our technical department get asked about most, is why is there no blocks for the height adjustment in with the tile insert waist? That's quite a simple answer, really. The tile insert waist has a part that you drop a tile into. Now, I don't know how well you can see that from there. But you can see I can stick my finger in there. There's a depth of about 12, 13 mil in there, which will allow the tile to get put in there. Now, what I would suggest you do with this, because it's very shiny in there, is to get a bit of the tanking membrane, cut a slither of it to put it in the bottom, and just stick that down before you stick your tile in there, so the tile adhesive's got a decent bit of purchase on it rather than the shiny side of it. Okay, so this one is designed for 8 to 10 mil tiles. We do have a slightly larger version of it if you wanted to go a little bit further than that. But you know, fundamentally, there's no height adjustment with this because your tile is going in at the finished height, and you tile from that outwards. So you know, there's no tile adjustment with that. Has anybody got any questions on linear? Okay, so the options that we've got with the traps, you haven't got as many options as you have with Easy Fit. So you see on this one, we've got the horizontal outlet on there. We can also fit the vertical one because that's an option as well. And we tend to find in concrete floor or block and beam floor that the horizontal outlet is the one that people use. You've got all the same features with that one. If I put the dip tube and bucket in there, you can see it just sits in the middle. And if I pull that out, you can see that it's got the 40mm waste outlet in there that can be rodded if necessary. What I will say about the vertical one is that you need to make sure that you cut that hole in that floor so that this is sat perfectly in the middle of it. What you don't want is it twisted a little bit because you know, obviously it's got the one screw like the Easy Fit has, and if it's under any kind of pressure, it's going to pull this rubber seal away from the edges a little bit. So you need to make sure that wherever you bore that hole, this has got to sit down inside it. Now the vertical trap, this can actually fit inside a piece of 110mm pipe. So if you've planned it properly, or it's in a new build and you've got a blank canvas and all you've got is your 110mm waste pipe stuck out, this will drop straight down into it. Now, you could solvent weld that straight in for a permanent fixture. Personally, I wouldn't do that. I would use a rubber boss on the top of there, and I would push it down into it, just in case you had to get it out for any reason. Because what you don't want to be doing is having to cut a piece of 110mm down to below your concrete level, because connecting onto that is going to be a complete pain if you have to do that again. So use a boss to connect that one in if necessary. The flow rate won't change with this. You're still going to get 42 to 45 litres of water through there per minute. Now, we've got 3 different types of linear. The original one was a 4-way fall. Now that has a drain that generally runs along the long edge of the former, with a fall front to back and from 2 sides. The one that we saw in the video was a 2-way fall, so that's front to back. The advantage of that one is that there's no diagonal cuts for the tiler, so you can actually brick bond tiles on there. The lowest point is the central part of where the drain goes in, so that's where your 2 falls meet. And having the upstands on the side of it means that there isn't going to be any sitting water on that flat part, because water's heavier, and once you've got a flow of water, it'll just run down to the drain. Now, the other one that we've got, the newest one, which seems to be getting very, very popular at the moment, is the 3-way former. Now, the good thing about that one is that the waste is really, really close to the edge of the former itself, and that basically gives you a massive fall from the side right to the edge. And it's as it's structural, like all the other Impey formers, you could bring your wall right down onto that, bringing your wall right down up to the trap. So people are liking the whole idea of having a waste that's right up against the wall where you don't tread on it. And if you put a tile insert in there as well, you've disguised that drain so that there's almost no drain in there at all, which again is another thing that we're seeing, which is very popular at the moment. Anybody got any questions?
I've had a couple come through on the chat, Sean. So first one, in a concrete floor, would you protect the pipe with anything before bedding the tray in?
Would I protect the pipe? Yeah, well, I've done it before. The one that I did in my house, I basically just put a load of wet sand down and packed that right in. What I don't like encasing pipe work into concrete, because it does swell and you could damage it. I've packed sand in there before. Maybe put a little bit of something like a gravel underneath it, just for it to sit on to get it propped up properly. But pack it out with sand and just put a skim over the top of it. If you've got wet sand on it, just pack a bit of the screed over the top of that just to flatten it if necessary. But if your pipe chase is only quite thin, really it doesn't need to be supported on that area. I hope that answers that one.
Great, thank you. And then they have another one that came through. So it said, would you recommend using Loctite on the waste screw thread to prevent it becoming loose over time?
Good question. Potentially, yes. I wouldn't want to risk not being able to get that trap out again. So what I would potentially do would be to build maybe a small shelf underneath it so that it can sit on that. And it reduces the movement that could be created with it. So if you've got no movement up and down with that, there shouldn't be any sideways movement with it, so it shouldn't loosen that screw at any point. So rather than put something on there that's permanent that you might have to break out afterwards, potentially I'd put something in that was a little bit more organic, and maybe put a decent bit of support on there so that you don't have to put Loctite or Araldite or anything on there to lock that in. Because if at any stage you needed to get that out, you'd end up having to break it. If you break the crossbar on this plate, it means a new plate, which means the membrane would have to come up, tiles would have to come up, the membrane would have to come up, and it's a bit of a nasty fix. However, saying that, our extremely clever guys in technical have got a very simple way of getting out of it if you do break this. We have a 3D printer in our R&D department that can 3D print an ABS bar that if you cut it off, if you cut the broken one off quite tidily and just sand that down, you can just solvent weld another one in. So we have got a solution for that. We don't encourage people to do that. This is something that we've done to get people out of trouble. But this is what we're all about at Impey. We're here to help. You know, a lot of people haven't seen these products before. People go in blind. Not everybody reads instructions, and people will go ahead and they'll go gung-ho with a whizzy and do things up like that. And you might find an end user will start fiddling around with it as well, trying to prise the dip tube and bucket out with a screwdriver. That might break it as well. So, you know, there's a couple of things in there. There's a couple of reasons why we have that, but. You know, any of this advice, do phone up the guys in technical, because you know, we talk about this stuff all the time. We've seen most situations, well, I think every situation that is possible, if that is possible, within the technical department. So you know, if you have got any queries about it, or you're not sure, or if you're on site, you know, give the guys a call. They won't leave you hanging on site. They're very good at answering the phone, because we know how important it is to get information across to people that are sat scratching their heads on site sometimes. Anybody else got any questions on that? Okay, right, I'm going to swiftly move along, or I'm going to move along. While we're still on the subject of gradient, I've got a product here that I want to show you that you might not have ever seen before. This is just another solution for creating gradient into a floor. Now, this one is called AquaGrade and AquaGrade Linear. Now, this one is slightly different. This is for a new pour concrete floor. And this is basically a template that will create a 1 in 40 gradient with concrete as you backfill it. So let me show you this one, and we'll have a chat about this afterwards.
Okay, so this is the AquaGrade and AquaGrade Linear. So this does exactly the same as the others, but it's designed to be used with a concrete floor as a template so that you can backfill, so you can make yourself a wet room former out of concrete. I'll explain how. So the way this works is that you can clip these bits together to make pretty much whatever size you like. So it has got tendencies to be a bespoke product. There are a few restrictions with sizes or things that you really need to know about. So these particular plastic pieces, they clip together. They're 150 mil wide, which will dominate what size you can create. So you'll notice that they are different colors. The blue sections are corners. The red sections are 450 mil long, and you'll see on the former itself, you've got green sections which are 300 long. So they all clip together, very much like a jigsaw puzzle. And I've clipped those bits together. And the gradient is built into where these two bits connect together. So the way that they're molded adds a little bit of extra gradient. So every time I add one piece onto it, it raises the outside edge up by about 5 mil to create a 1 in 40 gradient. So this is the AquaGrade Linear version. You can tell that because we've got the starter section, which is always the yellow section, is rectangle. Okay, so we've got it set in this top left-hand corner. In the kit, you could have it in the right-hand corner. The only difference is this little cut-down section here. So when you start at the beginning with the yellow section. Now you need to get this level. okay? Now, the way you do that is you put a couple of little legs in the bottom. There's 4 legs in the bottom of there. You get a Phillips screwdriver and you tighten it up to get the level on there. Once that's level, you can get going. Now, remember, when you build this, you've got to backfill it with a relatively dryish screed mix. So at this stage, if you've got this yellow section, you've already got some already mixed, you want to backfill this, okay? So once you've got these bits on it, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to backfill it. So if you get the opportunity to do that, backfill it as you can. You can use whatever you like. You can use a little pointing trowel, but the reality is you'd probably get handfuls of it and shove it under there with your hands because it's a little bit easier. So the rule of thumb with this is when you build the grade, you've always got to build it clockwise, okay? So we'll always start in this corner and go clockwise, and the reason being is because we don't want to end up with 2 of the male pieces together because it's probably going to be right in the corner where you can't reach it. If you do find yourself with a male piece up against the corner, there's no reason why you can't just get a pair of pliers and just snap that bit off. So you can see we've started building this already. On the bottom of here is some little feet to keep it rigid. So you build around there and you just tap the feet. If you find it's a little bit loose, you just tap it so that all the vibration's gone and you're ready to move on. Those feet aren't going to change the gradient on here because if you remember, the gradient is molded into the sections how they connect together. So I'm going to carry on with this. I'm going to put another corner piece in, which is always going to be the blue sections. And I'll adjust that down a little bit. Give it a tap, make sure it's not bouncing around too much. Okay, just adjust that foot down so it's touching the bottom. So when you tap it, it doesn't move. So if you find yourself in that situation where it's still moving, what you want to do is put in one of the little cups that you'll see on the bottom. So little 10mm spacers, and they're really designed so that you haven't got the foot right on the edge of the thread that's moving around. Once the screed's in there and it's gone off, it doesn't really matter because it's rigid, but this is there to keep it in a position so that you can backfill it properly to get your accurate 1 in 40 gradient in there. Okay, so we've got it in level. We know the fall's there naturally because it's molded into the plastic pieces. We've got it in the position we want. I've tapped it a little bit, make sure it's all sturdy and ready to go. I'm going to backfill it. In this case, I'm going to backfill it with some slightly damp Somerset sand. Normally you would use a weak sand and cement mix, let's say probably a 4-to-1 mix. And what you've got to remember this, and you've got to respect the fact that it's going to need time to dry. So once this is filled, and depending on what size it is, you're going to be looking at possibly a day per millimetre for it to dry, or a week per 10mm. But one of the most important things to know is that it's got to be clinically dry before you put your next layer on top of it. So if you've got a moisture meter, 10% moisture or less is clinically dry enough for you to be able to put your membrane down or a vinyl, depending on what you're putting on top of it. Okay, so I'm just going to backfill this with a bit of this nice wet sand. And I'm going to get a plastic float, and I'm just going to force the sand or screed down into the grade. Now spend a bit of time doing this because it's very important that you get rid of all the gaps in there. What you don't want is little gaps. If you find that it's not filling it up, steal a bit from somewhere else. And just use the back of the float just to knock it down. And keep it tidy. If you have to run around the edge, tidy up the edges. Just keep knocking it in until you find that when you tap it, it doesn't bounce anymore, and you know you've got it completely solid. So once you've done that, you can then, with a circular motion, try and put a finish on it. Okay, what you're looking for is, you can see these little, the little peaks of the little plastic pieces just grinning through the wet screed. Okay. So there's a product partially backfilled. you get the idea of how this product works. As I said before, it's very important that you respect the drying time. What we don't want to see is you backfill it and set this up, and then you know, maybe 2 days or a week after, there's people walking over it with or walking wheelbarrows over it because it needs that time to set. It doesn't pay to do it in 2 layers. Now, the way that you fit this is horses for courses, really. The way that we would probably recommend it is that you pour your concrete floor, shutter an area off for the size that you're going to do, drop this in afterwards, because that means then you can get this outside edge exactly the same height as your existing screed, and then you can work down onto the drain to ensure that your 1 in 40 gradient is a perfect connection between what you're dropping into your shuttered area. Now, the alternative way of doing this is to build this first, backfill it, and then pour the screed up to it. Now, thinking of it that way, it's going to be quite difficult because, you know, I've seen people wading around up to their ankles in screed before, and it's not very easy to get it as level as you want without spilling it over and ruining all the fine details that you've done. So it's probably better that you shutter an area off, pour your screed, and then drop this in on top of either a hardened floor or your insulation board. Okay, so what can you achieve with this product? As you see in these pictures, here are a couple of examples of what you can do. Now, these kits are very similar. You can see that the AquaGrade, the standard AquaGrade, has got a square starting piece. It's done exactly the same way as we saw with the linear. You always start with the yellow section and work around it clockwise. Now, you can see the configurations that we've got on here. So you've got one with a central drain, you've got one with a drain up against the wall, and you've got one in the corner. Now, you could quite easily turn this one into this one by adding exactly the same amount of rows all the way around it. So you're not limited to what you can do with this product, but do be aware, the bigger the product gets, the deeper it's going to be. The knock-on effect with that means that a little bit more drying time, a little bit more screed, but do take into consideration that if it's going to be deeper, you need to make sure that your shuttered area that you're going to be putting it into is deeper. Now, that might mean that you've got to backfill it a little bit, which isn't such a bad thing, because if you've got insulation board in there and you pour a leveling mix or a screed mix over the top, it binds it all in and stops it from moving. So when it's curing, you've got less chance of it moving and cracking and drying out too quick. Same with the linears that you can see on the bottom of here. The one that you see here with the central drain, you could make this one into that by just adding those rows around it, just by clipping the rows together. So it's very, very versatile. You can pretty much make whatever shape you like and whatever configuration you like to whatever situation you've got. So this is AquaGrade, an AquaGrade linear. So this is predominantly for a concrete floor and really for a new build or a new poured concrete floor. You can fit it retrospectively, but it would mean cutting the concrete out. If you're going to do that, you might as well fit an easy fit because you're only having to cut 22 mil thickness out for easy fit. Okay, so pick the right situation for this product. If you can shut the door and let this dry, this is the product for you. If there's going to be other trades on site when this is curing, this is probably not the product, and you'd probably be looking at maybe the linear deck or the easy fit bedded down onto a concrete floor to make your life a little bit easier.
Well, that's a lot of fun to fit that one. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that before. Paul, have you seen that one before? Have you got any uses for that?
Hi, bud. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Yeah, I've not used that product myself. I've seen the video before when I've been sort of researching your products, but it's something I would probably have a go at if I was going to use it on my own property. But I think, you know, with the drying times, I guess the easy fit would be the better option, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's potentially not commercially savvy to use that, depending on the situation. I have been on quite a big site up in London before, where they fitted they fitted about 90 of these, and you know, I went up to have a look at that site, and there was about 1,500 people working on there. You know, the underground car park was like a builder's merchant, and it was very, very busy place. And there were 2 or 3 days after these things were being put in, there was plasterers stood on milk crates, plastering the walls all over it and bouncing it up and down. So it's not an ideal situation. but yeah, the drying time is the biggest drawback on it. But there are a lot of situations where this is used. Now in Southern Ireland currently, the building regs say when you build a new house, you've got to put in a wet room downstairs, and this is future-proofing houses in Southern Ireland. Now this is something that's come from a European ETAG regulation that we were threatened with, or not threatened with, but you know, we read about a long time ago about future-proofing houses, and it's not actually hit our it's not really hit the UK yet, but I think it eventually will. It's all about future-proofing. We're seeing all kinds of changes in buildings at the moment. We're seeing, you know, things like meter-wide doors and you know, plugs mounted, so wheelchair users can get them without falling out the wheelchair or having to struggle to get to it. So you know, people are taking future-proofing very seriously, and I would think this product is in a perfect position to be able to take up that in a new build when they're pouring floors. So it's something that it is horses for courses, really. As I said in the other videos, and you know, as you said, Paul, it's you know, if you're up against time, the Easy Fit is the product to use, or the Linear, because you can bed it down and it could be gone off in a couple of days, and you know, it's structural enough for you to be able to walk on it and carry on with the next stages. Now, if you have a look at this product in our books, it talks about 2 falls, 1 wall, 3 falls, and it's a little bit confusing. What you'll find is if you have a look at that product, as long as there is even amount of rows that have been built around the yellow section on there, you can put it anywhere you like. So you're not really restricted to what it says in the book. If you're not sure about that, give us a call and we can explain that to you. The most important thing is that the edges that are up against the existing floor that's been poured are the same height. So if you put the yellow drain section in the corner and you worked out, you've got 2 sections that have got to be the same height. So you've got to have at least 3 rows on one side and 3 rows on the other side, so that it's at the same height. So if you didn't have that, it would create kind of a wedge shape. So when you come to pour your floor, you would have a little bit that's higher than the other, and you'd have a slight step in it, like you do in the two-way linear. So it's very, very important that they get built evenly. The height adjustment is pretty much done at the yellow section when you start making it. So if, for example, you've poured a floor, you've got 75 mil of screed in there, which is pretty standard. You want to set your yellow section. Let's say, for example, you've got 3 rows of additional lines that you put on there that create 15 mil. So you set your yellow section up at 65 mil, so that your outside edge is always going to finish flush at 75 mil, which is the same height as your finished floor. Now, it pays to work backwards like that. So whether that means that you've got to put some kind of fill in the shuttered area, because you might be down on some kind of hard insulation, it would pay really to think about that, think about the depth that you've got on there. So let's say, for example, you've got 150 mil of depth because you've poured your floor, you've shuttered the area off, and you sat down onto some Kingspan or something like that. What you don't want to do is backfill with a screed 150 mil, because that's going to take forever to dry. So your best bet is to either build that up a little bit with something that's a little bit more quicker drying. A latex can be quite quick. Some latexes you can put will dry very, very quickly at 50 mil to feather within a couple of days. So you could do that. You could bring the insulation up a little bit more so that you're not having to backfill it with as much depth as well. So the more planning that's involved in it, the better it is for the person that's fitting it. Now, if you are fitting this down onto insulation board, the little adjustable feet that we saw that we were tapping to ensure that we had enough stability with the product, they can be mounted on these little spreader feet that've got spikes on it. Now, the good thing about those is you can just bang those straight into your hard insulation board, and it just anchors it down a little bit and keeps it in place for when you backfill it. So the important part of it really is to make sure that when you start off, you get your yellow section in and you put a level on it all the way around. Now the level is achieved just by screwdriver in all 4 corners. Get that level, and then you don't need a spirit level on there after that, because the way that these plastic bits clip together, are consistent all the way around. They're all molded the same. If I hold it up close to the camera, you might be able to see that. You might be able to see the slight discrepancy in the two, and it is quite slight. But the more you add onto it, the more it continues the 1 in 40 gradient. So the only leveling you need is the yellow section. Everything that you put on after that will follow form because it's all been predetermined with the molding of the plastic on there. Now, we haven't done much experimenting with drying time. We'll give you the worst case scenario with a weak sand and cement mix. There is bound to be products now on the market that will dry a bit quicker. Now, doing a little bit of homework on backfilling it, that's probably that'll do yourself a massive favor. I know when we first brought this out, we did try fiber-based screeds and things like that to make it bind together. One thing that we did try is we did try flood filling it to a certain level, and then letting that go off overnight, and then backfilling it with something drier. That doesn't work. That just will not bind to itself. Now, I guess if you put something like a wall hanger in there, it would probably bind to it a little bit better, but it's really just not worth it. And it's worth doing and backfilling all in one go rather than trying to do 2 different levels of 2 different substances that are slightly different consistency. So we have failed enough times to be able to give you the right information on this, but we aren't concrete experts or screed experts. If any of you have got a product that you feel might work a little bit better in there, I would really be very, very interested to know about it. And also, while we're talking, micro screeds and resin flooring as well. If anybody's got any ideas on how this could work with these products, I'll be really interested to hear that too. Right. So has anybody got any questions on the AquaGrade or the AquaGrade Linear?
Do the 3 systems have the same weight tolerance?
A little bit more, in fact. As it's a concrete floor, and there's 0 flex in that concrete floor, there'll be a lot more a weight tolerance on that. Once it's dried, it basically turns into a block of concrete that will take a lot more than the 47 stone of the former itself. Good question.
Thanks very much.
Okay, anybody else got any questions?
I've had one come through. How do you avoid screed going down the drain?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that one. I've prepared something for you. Right, so the dip tube, simply enough, the dip tube. So the dip tube and bucket that creates the 50 ml water seal and the and is a hair catcher. If you just turn that upside down, let me just show you on here. I'll take the clamp out. If you turn it upside down and just position it back into the linear drain, or the standard one if necessary, that O-ring will stop anything from going down the drain and backfilling it. So yeah, that's quite a neat little trick and a very good question. Anybody else got any questions on that while we're on it? Okay, right, this moves me swiftly along to waterproofing. Now, we've talked about gradient. We've seen the different ways that we can achieve it with Impey products. Now, the whole concept of what we've done and what we've done from the start is to make everybody's lives easier. Okay, so before we created these preformed products, you had to manipulate whatever material you were using by hand to create a 1 in 40 gradient. That's not the easiest thing in the world to do. It takes a mathematician to work out the falls properly. So basically, we've taken the sting out of everything. We've taken all the headaches out of creating a gradient by pre-creating a 1 in 40 gradient into our formers, into our linear former, into the grade. But the most important thing about any wet room is to make sure that you're protecting your building from water. So the waterproofing for me is the most important thing. I've had training sessions when we do this on the road where we've got 30 guys sat in there, and for an hour people can just look blankly at me with the fear of what could go wrong with a wet room. And when people get a chance to see the waterproofing membrane that we have, and get to handle it and get to fit it and get to use it, and see how easy and clean and quick it is to install, I see light bulb moments, just flash straight away, and I see people walking out of there with enough confidence to go ahead and fit a wet room. So for me, this is the most important part of any wet room, and if I'm honest, it's probably my favorite product that we do. So I'm going to introduce you to a product called WaterGuard. Now, WaterGuard is a self-adhesive fleece membrane. I've got a video done by Toby, who runs the technical department now. We'll watch that, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about that as well.
Impey WaterGuard is a 1mm thick self-adhesive membrane for wet room floors and walls, compatible with all powdered flexible wet room adhesives and grouts. WaterGuard also incorporates class-leading decoupling properties of 10mm, eliminating the need for a separate decoupler. This video guide shows a typical installation on 2 walls and a wooden floor. Any installation, of course, should be carried out with full reference to the supplied instructions. The floor structure needs to be prepared in accordance with the relevant British standards before tiling. Ensure the floor and work area is clean and dry, and remove any sharp protrusions. Apply the supplied primer to all porous surfaces that will be covered by the membrane. The Easy Fit deck is not porous and should therefore not be primed. Once dry, you can begin to fit the pre-formed corners. We recommend removing the back covers one at a time. Gently guide the adhesive surface onto the floor-to-wall junction and gently smooth over. Repeat for all internal and external corners. Using the jointing tape provided, equally line all wall-to-floor junctions with 75mm of tape. It's important that these locations are always taped, regardless of whether installing on walls or floors. Do the same to any affected vertical junctions. Releasing the backing paper in small stages will help in the process and allow for any minor adjustment. Most installers prefer to tank the wall first, as it reduces the risk of damaging the floor membrane whilst working on it. Measure 1 meter vertical intervals on the wall. This will determine the center of the tape position. Cut to size and, beginning from above, gently peel back manageable sizes of the backing paper and smooth down by hand until the tape overlaps the layers at the floor junction. Repeat until all wall sections are defined. You are now ready to apply the main WaterGuard membrane. Position the edge of the membrane so that it's aligned with the center line of the vertical tape. Gradually remove the release paper and carefully set into position as you move down the wall, pressing down firmly until finally overlapping the jointing tape at the bottom. Ensure that there are no air bubbles in the membrane as you apply it. Repeat the process for the next wall sheet, allowing a gap of 2 to 3mm for sealant, which will be applied later. With the walls covered, the floor will now be waterproofed. In a similar way to the walls, measure 1 meter intervals to determine the center of the tape. Begin by laying the first piece of jointing tape centered at 1 meter from the wall, or 925mm to the tape edge. Repeat this process across the entire wet floor surface at 1 meter intervals. Before laying the membrane, you must first ensure that the clamping ring has been removed and set aside with the securing screws, and that the cutting guide has been placed in the center of the waste. Beginning in the corner, measure across the room and cut the required length of membrane. Gradually remove the release paper and carefully set into position whilst overlapping the jointing tape. Allow a 2 to 3mm gap for sealant as before. Try to avoid leaving any air bubbles or wrinkles. If there are any, smooth them out, but do not puncture the membrane. As with the jointing tape, releasing the backing paper in small stages helps make the process much easier to complete. Repeat until the entire floor is covered, including the drain. The penultimate stage is to locate the drain aperture and the inside edge of the cutting guide. With a hook knife blade, carefully cut the membrane around the inside of the guide. Remove the offcuts and then press the edges of the membrane into the dished area of the drain bowl. Replace the clamping ring and screw down with 4 screws. It's important to tighten the screws by hand. Do not use power tools. Finally, apply the sealant to all gaps between the membrane and all wall-to-floor junctions and carefully smooth the sealant over. Note the sealant will always remain flexible and tacky to some degree to aid the decoupling properties of the membrane. That completes the tanking process. The WaterGuard membrane can now be tiled on without any further delay. WaterGuard is available in a range of wall-to-floor kit sizes, and additional pre-formed internal and external corners can be purchased separately if required.
So we spent all that time, or we spent as little time as we need to, putting the gradient into the floor. We've shored everything up. We've let things dry off. And we're ready to protect it and protect the rest of the building with a tanking membrane that'll give you that little bit of peace of mind to be able to walk away from your wet room installation without any worries about it leaking at any point in its life. So I'm going to show you a product called WaterGuard. Now, tanking or waterproofing is a very, very important part of any wet room installation. So there are a lot of different products on the market that can do that. You can have a paint-on system. That's most of the time you have to put a couple of coats on there. 9 times out of 10, it takes 24 hours between each coat. So you've got 2 days before that particular tanking's gone off, ready for you to be able to come and tile on top of it. And it's opened up for human errors as well. If you miss a little bit of a pinhole in one of the corners and water gets to that, it will get through it. So there's a paint-on system. There's also a standard sheet tanking system that gets put on with tile adhesive. That, again, is a slightly laborious job because you've got to wait for drying time and you've got to apply tile adhesive at least twice to it, as well as a primer. So it's not a very quick job, although it's a little bit more thorough than the paint-on system itself. The system that we're going to look at here is a sheet fleece membrane, but it's a self-adhesive fleece membrane that will allow a little bit of decoupling as well. But it's very quick, it's very easy to fit, it's very mess-free, and it's instant once it's stuck down. So we're going to show you a little bit of this. So this is the WaterGuard kit. Now, this is one of 2 kits. We do a 5-meter kit and a 10-meter kit. Now, what that gives you is 5 square meters or 10 square meters. Now, the roll itself is a meter wide by either 5 meters long or 10 meters long, and can be cut quite simply with a Stanley knife. You get a roll of jointing tape or 2 rolls of jointing tape. Now, this gets put on first. There's 5 internal corners and 1 external corner, just in case you've got a bulkhead or fireplace or something in there. It also comes with a bottle of APD primer as well, acrylic bonding. Now, that needs to be applied with a gloss roller, a little sponge roller. And the reason we do that is 1, it's a little bit quicker, and 2, you don't have to put on so much. So the whole idea of putting the primer on is really to get rid of all the dust to seal in the floor that you're doing. So really, you only have to do the porous surfaces. So don't do over any of the decks, because you'll be there waiting for up to an hour for it to skin off. Just do the porous surfaces. If you're only doing the floor, remember to do 75 mil up the wall, because that's how far the jointing tape has to go up. The roll of liquid butyl the tube of liquid butyl that we've got in here is for finishing. That really is to finish the butt joints that you're going to create. Just a very, very small bead of this, then just rubbed in as you saw done in the video, and that basically will deflect the water away if it gets under the tiles from that butt joint. Okay, so when you fit this, you need to be at the stage where it's just before final fix. So what I mean by that is, when you're ready as a tiler to go in with your slippers on and everything's clean enough to be able to do this, this is the time to do it. So what you need to do is you need to go in there with a hoover, clean all the dust out as much as you can, prime it, let the primer go off. Now, depending on what you put the primer onto, it's going to take between 20 and 40 minutes max. If you put it on the gloss roller, it means it goes on really thin. If the surfaces are porous and clean and grease-free, it's going to go off within 20 minutes and you're ready to go. So you'll notice the primer goes on clear and it goes off blue. So when it starts to turn blue and it's got no tack to it at all, that's when you need to start doing your installation. So what I would normally do when I do this is I'll put my corners in first. I'll then connect the corners up with the jointing tape. What I normally do with this is I'll measure up how long I need to do with this. I will leave it about 5 mil shy either side so that you're not kind of bunching the jointing tape up on the corners, because that's going to create a little bit of a problem when you come to put your main sheet on there. So connect all your corners up with the jointing tape. Then measure from the wall, run your jointing tape down the middle for where you need to connect your big sheets up together. Now, the membrane itself, very simple to manipulate. I'm just going to run a knife through it, and that's just cut. Okay, so one of the good things about this is it's very easy to pull the backing off of it to expose the sticky part. Okay, so if I pull the plastic back and expose, this is the butyl rubber under here. Now this is fine to be used with electric underfloor heating. It can come into contact with 55 degrees, whereas the surface can come into contact with 60 degrees. Now if I stick the sticky piece down and give it a little bit of pressure, warm it up so it sticks properly, and if I start pulling it one way, you can see it'll allow movement, but it leaves a bit of the butyl rubber behind. Now that's your decoupling, how that works. So the whole of the top layer can move without affecting your bed of tiles, your tile adhesive and grout that you've already put on. So up to 10 mil lateral movement, and that allows for shrinkage, settlement, all the things that you're going to get under the floor during your installation. Okay, when you've got your corners in, and when you've connected everything up with the jointing tape, you want to put the big sheet down. The best thing you want to do really is to just pull a bit of the backing off, let's say about an inch, and stick that down and get that right to the angle of the wall. What you're going to find is that this wall's going to be out a little bit because nothing's ever square. So what you want to do is work from the top and just keep working backwards a little bit. And if you find that it's creeping away a slight different angle away from the wall and it's going to end up a bit of a gap, it might be worth you just cutting the sheet where you are, putting another piece of jointing tape in there and starting again so that you're not going off angle. What you don't want to do is start trying to correct it once you've got half of the sheet stuck down, because that's going to create a crease or a bunch in there somewhere, and that's going to cause a few problems. So don't try and correct it. If you panic and you're moving away from the wall a little bit, stop, put a piece of jointing tape underneath and cut another piece and start again. As long as it's as it says in the instructions, it's not going to put it under any kind of jeopardy at all. If you find that when you're rolling out, you've got between a 5, 10 or 15 mil gap in there, I would just carry on doing that. You've got the jointing tape in there that's going to give you a 75 mil overlap. Once it's done, if you wanted to, you could cut a thin strip and put over the top of it, but you know, at the end of the day, you could probably just finish that, or my advice would be to finish that with the jointing compound, rub it in that edge to make sure that edge is completely sealed, and then you can just tile straight over the top of it. Okay, so we've looked at putting water guard on the floor. Water guard can be used on walls. It's got a maximum load on the walls for 30 kilos per square meter. Do take into consideration that a square meter of tile adhesive and grout is about 4 kilos, so 26 kilos for your tiles on the wall. It comes in two types of kits. So we've looked at the floor kit. The floor kit comes with all the corners, everything you'd need to fit this, to waterproof that floor. Up to 75 mil up the wall is in 2 boxes. If you want to do the walls, a wall kit can provide you a little bit of extra membrane. It doesn't come with corners because you don't need it. It comes with extra tape. So in essence, if you've got a bigger floor than, or if you've got a bigger floor than the 5 meter kit and smaller than the 10 meter kit, it might pay to buy a floor and a wall kit. You'll be able to do the whole of the floor with that because you get all the corners that you need in the floor kit.
So that's water guard. Now, the thing that you see straight away from that is that there's apart from the primer, that is a very simple thing that you could do the day before if you needed to. There's no wet mixes involved. There's no mess with it. It's instant. Once it's down, it's doing its job. The jointing compound that you put down at the end is a belt and braces thing, and really the jointing compound is there if you do get slight bunches on it that could create a slight tunnel, and that's really there to just finish that off. The good thing about this, really, it's a very, very quick way of doing it, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that you get this part right. So, you know, the only thing that could cause problems, you know, is movement in the floor. We've seen how to put the formers down correctly. Once that's down on top, it can deal with quite a lot of you know, shrinkage, settlement, movement under the floor because the butyl rubber doesn't ever go off. So it works as a decoupler in that respect. So all these products, as you can see, are designed for people that want to get in there, get out as quickly as possible and make money doing this. And this is no exception. So there are a load of other tanking systems on the market. We would really only recommend sheet membrane, because it's you know you're covering the whole floor with that. And there are paint on systems on the market. It can be open to a little bit of human error with paint on systems. Even a pinhole that you miss in the corner could create problems. But the important thing is to make sure that you waterproof that area. And I would personally recommend the whole bathroom floor. And if you do that, we can give you the lifetime guarantee that it isn't going to leak across the whole bathroom floor. So, for example, if you left, a 2 foot at the other end of the bathroom where your toilet is, and the water some reason gets under the tiles because you've got cracked grout or something like that, and it could track to the end of that membrane. If you start getting water pouring down through the floor there's nothing we can do as far as the warranty on the product. So always do the whole bathroom floor. There is going to be a situation, or there might be a situation where you might have a massive bathroom. All you can do really is use the whole kit that you have. And what we've done with the product as well to reduce the chances of the water tracking under the floor is to put weep holes in all the drains. So in the past, and some other drains, they haven't got those weep holes. So if water does get under the tile, the water won't get back into the drain. But with these products, it will. So what you'll find is that instead of it filling up the 15 mil dip, or the 1 in 40 dip that we've got, and then spilling out over the rest of the floor and then tracking across the floor to the door, it'll release that pressure and it'll take that water down into the drain. So we shouldn't really see that at all with the way that the products are made now. But securing waterproofing the whole of the room means that you're securing the property from water damage that can cause a lot of problems. Right, has anybody got any questions on WaterGuard?
Is it compatible with shower boarding?
It is. That's a very good question. Now, shower boarding is, what do you mean, finished shower boarding like we've got behind us, or tile backer board which you put up before you tile onto?
Like you've got behind you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is. What you do find is that there are certain ways you fit this stuff. We've tested some of the adhesives that you get with the wall boarding, and what we've tested, it works fine with the WaterGuard. What I will say though is that what you don't want to do is screw through the tanking membrane at the bottom if you've run up the wall 75 mil or even up the wall with it. So screwing through it is a slightly different thing. There are ways you can screw through it safely. The way that I would suggest is that you, if you do put a hole into it, you want to backfill that with the jointing compound and then screw into that, ensuring that the jointing compound comes out, will spill out or spew out when you screw that screw in, and that'll completely waterproof that screw hole that you put into it. I wouldn't suggest you do that into the floor because the floor is a lot more vulnerable. But yeah, the glues that we use with the wall boarding are compatible with the surface of the fleece membrane. Now, the fleece membrane itself is inert. It's a polyethylene, polyurethane sandwich with a butyl rubber on the bottom. Now, when it comes to using chemicals that you would be using, things like epoxy grout and silicones and things like that, the surface area won't be affected by anything like that at all. So anything that you've got, solvent-based tile sealers or glues and things like that, it doesn't affect the top surface of that. What I would say though, if you've got anything that's solvent-based, you really don't want it to come into contact with the underside of it. So make sure the membrane's down properly, the jointing tape's down properly, and you've used the butyl rubber around the edges so that any kind of solvent won't get to the butyl underside of it. Good question.
Thank you. Can I ask another one, please?
Yeah, of course.
Does the WaterGuard kit contain any vinyl? Because we had somebody, sorry, not vinyl, latex. We had somebody ask, somebody with a severe allergy asked if it contained any latex.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we do get asked quite a lot in healthcare, about the products that we use with latex. And I couldn't believe how many times we've been asked that. Yeah, the water itself, no, it doesn't contain any latex in it. It's butyl based, and it's polyethylene in the top, so it's a P rather than an L.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. So while we're on the subject, people will use backerboard, and I use it myself as well. If you've got tiles that are over the 30 kilos per square meter that you're going to get on the walls, you don't want to risk putting that tile onto WaterGuard. Okay, so what I would suggest, and what I would normally do, is I would run the tape 75mm up the wall, as you would normally. If you're using a backerboard, just try a little bit of the primer on there to see if it's worth priming. Now, some of them, I prime Hardy backerboard because it'll allow me to. Some of the other products on the market are a little bit different and a little bit uneven surface. And things like Wedi, which is a little bit more rough, that doesn't accept the primer, so you don't need the primer on that. So what I would suggest is that you just cut a little bit of the membrane off. You try a little bit of primer on the backerboard if you're using backerboard on the walls, and just see if it adheres to it. And if it comes off too easily, don't bother doing it. Don't bother priming it. Just make sure you wipe it down with a damp cloth to get rid of the dust on it, and then just carry on and just stick the membrane directly onto it. So there are different backerboards on the market, and I'm a big fan of it too. Backerboard, it's a no-brainer, especially if you're ripping the whole bathroom out and you don't want to put plasterboard back in. Tile backerboard is a very good option for that. One thing I do if I use backerboard, and I won't use WaterGuard at the wall, is when you brick bond the tile backerboard onto the wall before you screw fix it, I use a bit of the butyl rubber that comes in the kit just to as a little bit of mortar between the boards. You put the other board on top, you just run your finger along it to just seal it, so that instead of using tape and things that could be a little bit more expensive, you're sealing it with the butyl rubber. And even the first one you put that's down onto the floor, just run a little bit on there as well, and it just gives you that secondary barrier against anything that might get into it. I'm a bit of a belt and braces person. There's no point in doing things twice. So if you're going to do it, you might as well do it properly, and do whatever you can to make it good before you carry on and do the next stage of the installation. Anybody else got any questions?
Sean, I've had one come through on the chat there. Someone says that when they've discussed wet rooms with someone before, they've been told to use a decoupling mat. Is that something that they then put over the top of the WaterGuard?
Really good question. Personally, I wouldn't use a decoupler on top of the membrane, because the membrane will do exactly that. We know that it'll do 10 to 12 mil expansion or contraction or lateral movement on there. And when you introduce another product on top of it, you've got to do the same to get that down and adhere it to the top of the membrane, as well as you've done the membrane on top of the floor that you've put it onto. So introducing something else might cause a few other problems. Now, a lot of the decoupling mats that are used really do need to be flood filled with a latex. If you don't flood fill it with a latex, it means that water could get through if it gets under the tile. Now, if you're putting our membrane down and water gets under the tile, it'll sit on top of the membrane and work its way down to the drain. If you put a decoupler on there, you're introducing a lot of other ways that the water could go if you don't completely flood fill it. Now, I understand that some people want to put underfloor heating down on top of this, and we do manufacture our own underfloor heating that's compatible with this. It is a roll that you would roll down onto it, and it's got a little bit of self-adhesive properties to it that will stick directly down onto the membrane. But I do understand that some people prefer to use a loose wire, and some people will hone it around the decoupling mat that's available. Now, if you're going to do that, make sure that your connection between the decoupling mat and the membrane is completely adhered. Now, you're going to have to use some kind of liquid glue on there rather than a tile adhesive, because tile adhesive will allow water to get through it eventually if it's sat in water the whole time. So use something that's completely imporous or hydrophobic to make sure that you've put a decent bond on top of the membrane, but it has to be flood filled to stop water from traveling around inside it. But more importantly, with the underfloor heating, it needs to be flood filled with a latex on top of it anyway, because if you've got any kind of gaps in the in that decoupler with the underfloor heating, any kind of gaps could get a little bit hot and it could burn the underfloor heating out. So any kind of underfloor heating, if you're using that decoupler that you're putting it in there, or even if you're putting ours down on top, it needs a decent full bed of tile adhesive or latex over the top to ensure that it doesn't burn out over time. Now, if you're using latex over the over any of the wet room formers, you've got to mix it up very, very thickly, because you don't want to fill up all the gradient that you've just spent all that time putting down. So what I would suggest is that maybe it might be easier to use a bit of tile adhesive over the top of that rather than a latex that might want to level itself off. Yes, use it over the rest of the floor because we want to see a level floor over the rest of the bathroom floor, but over the former you might have to spend a little bit more time creating a little bit more firm detail rather than something that might want to self-level. Now, the biggest problem you've got with that is that you need to be very careful that you don't damage the underfloor heating with a notch trowel. So there are a few ways you can get around that. You could use a plastic float that isn't going to affect it, or you could, or there's other tools you can use. What you don't want to use is a metal notch trowel that could damage the underfloor heating, because if you take a small nick out of that underfloor heating, it's not going to work. Okay, so be a bit careful of that. But if you're going to use latex, be very careful not to fill up that gradient, because you'll lose all the performance of the former. Anybody else got anything on WaterGuard? Okay, right. I often get asked the question, what do I do if I've got pipes coming up through the floor? Or pipes going in through the wall. What I would do normally is I would cut a bit of the jointing tape. I would cut a 15mm hole in it if you can just use that as a patch and put it over the pipe. If you can't put it over the pipe because it's already connected up to a towel rail or a radiator, just cut a small square, cut your 15mm hole in it for the pipe to go over it, and then just put a small slit in it so that you can take it around that pipe. Okay. Now, a belt and braces approach would be do exactly the same, but reverse where that split is and put it on the other side, so that where the two splits are, they're completely opposite side, and you've got a piece of patch underneath it that's got the butyl rubber. And then when you come to put the big sheet down, do the same connection, but again, put the slit somewhere else so that it's not in the same place as the two that you put the patches down onto. It might be worth just cutting the hole a little bit smaller so that you can bunch up the pipe a little bit, so you've got a couple of mil protection. But remember, don't do it any deeper than the thickness of the tile and tile adhesive you're putting down, because it will stick up over the top of the tile, which would mean you'd have to cut it and trim it back to get a decent finish before you put your grout line in. So there are ways you can get around that kind of stuff as well. Now, tile adhesive on there, we would insist on a cement-based flexible tile adhesive. Never use a ready mix on a membrane because it will never go off. So, ready mix, they need exposure to air. Whereas if you just add water tile adhesive, it already, as soon as you add the water, it starts activating the chemical in the tile adhesive, and it will start curing straight away. So any kind of sheet membrane that you're putting down that's imporous or water resistant or waterproof, you use a ready mix on there, it isn't ever going to go off. And what you might find is 2, 3, even 6 weeks afterwards, you could physically pull that tile off because the tile adhesive won't ever cure. Okay, anybody got any questions on anything that we've seen? Anybody want me to run through anything again? Was that yes? Do you want me to run through the videos again? Okay. So we've looked at how to put gradient into the floor. A 1 in 40 gradient is the rule of thumb with gravity drainage, which takes the water down to the drainage point. We've looked at the different options you can use for drainage. If you've got something that's a little bit more specific, or you've got a situation where you know, water regulations might be slightly different, you might need to look at something else that we've got in our range. Where I live is very close to the Somerset levels. Every 2, 3, 4 years, the Somerset levels will flood and take it back to what it was like 2,000 years ago. And so the water table in those areas is quite high. In that situation, the local guys who are in charge of the water regulations will insist on a 75 or 100 mil water seal on whatever traps are used in those areas. If you're used to plumbing in your area, you'll know all of this. If you're not sure about it, there is information you can get from RAS. They will give you a lot of specifics. There are a few softened rules about water seals and drainage. Flat bottom delivery drainage, i.e. shower trays, potentially wet rooms. You're gonna have to check with your water regs people, and baths. They will allow a slightly less water seal in there. They'll allow you to take it down to 38 mil. Now, I've never seen a trap with a 38 mil water seal. The ones that I'm used to seeing are 50 with what we use, 75 or 100 for commercial with the ones that we use, the McAlpine traps that we use. But also, you know, in a previous life, when I used to work in a bathroom shop, we used to use a little McAlpine STC or an STW that had a 19 mil water seal in it. So they were very popular 20 years ago. And I can't imagine that none of those were used into a stack pipe ever. So, you know, there are a few softened rules when it comes to water seals, but do check with your local water regulations. With the pumps that we use, there are certain places in the world that you can't use those pumps. Central London, you're not allowed to use them. I think it's purely down to the fact that there's a lot of congestion with dwellings in London, and they like to know where the water's being put. But you got to remember with those pumps, they are a mechanical thing. If you can get gravity drainage with the wet room, it's free, it's easy to maintain. If you're putting a pump in there, obviously it's a mechanical option. It is a brilliant option, and it will enable anybody to put a wet room in any situation. Even if you have got a basement that's 2 stories down, they can be used in conjunction with a Saniflow system if you needed to get the water out. You know, anything further than what the pump will do, that's compatible with that as well. So it's a very, very good option for anybody that think they can't get a wet room in. So that's an option as well. They've got 3 non-return valves in it, so they do meet with water regulations when it comes to directing your water into a stack pipe. If you need information on those pumps, do give us a call. I can send you spec sheets. I can send you links to videos off the Whale website. It's Whale pumps that we use. Whale are a company that have been building these pumps for over 100 years now. The pumps are pretty much based on a bilge pump for a boat, and they are a diaphragm rather than an impeller. So these pumps are almost bomb-proof. You know, you're not having to every week pull out long hairs out of these things because of the diaphragm. And they're very, very easy to maintain as well. The pump head has got just 2 screws that you undo, or 1 screw now actually with the clamp on it that you can undo, drop the pump head down, and you can clean the inlet and outlet valve out. So it's a very, very simple design where your water goes through, and you've got an inlet and an inlet and an outlet valve that work in conjunction with each other, just allowing water to come through. So whatever goes down a 15 mil pipe will go through the pump head with no problems at all. Those pumps have got a little rubber tricuspid valve in the exit part. Any kind of harsh cleaners, drain blockers and things like that could affect that rubber seal. And if you find that big objects are going through there all the time, it might be worth just checking that non-return valve every 12 months to make sure it's still doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The telltale signs of a tricuspid valve that's not working properly is a slight backfill of water residue that doesn't get through the pump and past the non-return valve, that might come back into the pancake trap that we saw in the earlier video. Now that's a telltale sign of that little tricuspid valve needs replacing, and it's a very, very simple thing. It's just a little housing. I might have one here somewhere. No, it's a little housing that's about 75 mil long, that just unscrews from the pump head. You stick your finger in there, pull the non-return valve out, just have a look through it, and if you can see any kind of daylight in there, it's worth putting another one in there. They're very cheap. They're very cheap to buy. But what you'll find in most cases, if you're not putting objects down there, hair and things like that will get through it okay. Because it's rubber, it won't really pick up on line scale, so you won't worry about that blocking it up. So maintenance on a pump is very, very minimal, depending on the condition of your water. So what I will say is, if you have got a lot of calcium in your water, you might find that every 12 months you've got to take the pump head off and clean that out. Any more information you need on pumps, do give us a call in technical. The same as any of the products that we've seen here today. We can provide spec sheets for everything. So if you're in the planning stages, or you want to have a look at depths of traps to see if you can get it into your existing floor, the technical team are available. There's a picture there of the technical team. Toby, the one that sat at the front, he's the guy in the videos, so he knows how to fit these things. All of the guys are very, very well educated in wet rooms. They've been here for a long time now. They've grown with the wet room trend that we've created in the UK. So there's no questions that those guys won't be able to answer. They're very helpful. We understand in the technical department how important it is to be able to call someone back on site that's either looking at the instructions, scratching the head, or find themselves a situation where there's a complete bugger's muddle of stuff under a floor that they didn't know until the floor came up. So give those guys a call. We'll come up with a solution with any of the products that we have to make sure that you guys can go ahead and fit a wet room and create a beautiful showering space in any situation. If nobody's got any more questions, I'm pretty much done here. I'm quite happy to stay on if anybody's got any questions after. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. If you've got any more questions, do feel free to hang around. Like I say, I'll be on here for a bit now. And if you do need the technical department or anybody for any advice with wet rooms, do give us a call here at Impey. Thanks a lot.